Poetry, Patterns of Rhythm. Well, good morning. So if you've been following along in these video presentations, particularly here in this unit on poetry, you've heard me say on more than one occasion that poetry is musical and that poetry is meant to be read out loud. And if you know some things about music, you know that one of the core cornerstones, really, of music has to do with rhythm. And so when we're discussing poetry, sometimes we like to look at rhythm and the poet's use of it to achieve his or her effect in a poem. So the term rhythm refers to a wave-like recurrence of stressed and unstressed syllables or sounds. In speech, it's the natural rise and fall of language. You can hear rhythm as you're listening to me speak right now. So in every word of more than one syllable, one or more syllables is normally accented or stressed. That is, it's given more prominence in pronunciation than the rest. Poets often will arrange words in their poems in such a way that rhythm and stress work together to achieve a desired effect. And poets have an ear for rhythm, that musical quality, the rhythm of the language when we hear it spoken. Whitman, Walt Whitman, the 19th century poet you've heard me talk about, when he is thinking about his childhood or remembering his child, one of the things he remembers doing is lying on the beach on Long Island in New York as a boy and listening to the rhythm of the waves hitting the shore, crashing the shore, and then receding. That rhythm, and he said that that rhythmic motion of the ocean, he said, was so ingrained in his sensibility that it transferred over to the poetry that he would end up writing and becoming so famous for. So any discussion of rhythm as it applies to poetry is going to involve some discussion of meter. Meter is the identifying characteristic of rhythmic language that we can tap our feet to. When verse is metrical, the accents of the language are such that we can tap our feet to it or clap our hands. Let me give you an example. The lines that you see here in front of you are the first two lines from Robert Frost's poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Very popular, well-known poem. So let me read them, and as I read them, listen to the rhythm of the language. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. So in these opening lines of Frost's, we can detect four major stresses, or four what we would call accents. And I've drawn attention to those syllables by putting them in red font. So let me read this again. And as I read it again, look how the red words seem to be accented. And you could tap your feet to the language as I read it. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. Okay, so when we are reading poetry, again, that's why it's so important for it to be read out loud, because oftentimes you can detect a particular pattern, a particular rhythmic pattern in poems. Longfellow, for example, was a master at this, also a 19th century poet, American poet. And he was a genius and very talented at creating poems that were very, very, at times, very complex, but also using rhythm in a way that reinforced what he was writing about. And I'm thinking particularly of two poems of his, The Song of Hiawatha, and another one called The Tide Rises and the Tide Falls. And if you look up The Song of Hiawatha, you will, I don't have it in front of me, but when you read it, and I challenge you to do this, if you go and you Google The Song of Hiawatha and you find Longfellow's poem there, and you begin to read it out loud, you'll find that he follows this rhythm, and I'm going to tap it on my desk, and you might be able to hear it. That pattern is one that we often associate with the kind of the drums of Native Americans, of the Indians, the dun 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 dun. Well, in Song of Hiawatha, he crafts this incredibly long poem, and every line of that is the rhythm of it is particularly set to that rhythm. It's very interesting. The word meter comes from the word meaning measure. And when we measure something, we need a basic unit of measurement, don't we? Right? We think in terms of inches, yards, and miles. So in poetry, to measure a line of verse, we use what is called the foot. Okay? So the metrical foot, in other words, the basic unit of measurement that we use to measure a line of poetry, usually consists of one accented syllabus plus one or two unstressed syllables. So in those opening lines from Frost that I read just a second ago, whose woods these are, I think I know, his house is in the village though. In those lines there are 4 metrical feet. And we can say that because really what we're detecting in the rhythm are 4 stressed syllables. Whose woods these are, I think, I know, right? Woods, are, think, and know. Those words are emphasized, they're accented, they are stressed. So this is what is called tetrameter, okay? Tetra is the prefix meaning 4. Okay, so this is what we would call a line that was written in tetrameter. Now the process of measuring these stresses, or measuring the metrical feet in the line of a poem, is a process that's referred to as scansion. Scansion. Okay, so in case you're ever asked on a quiz or an exam what scansion is, it is the process of measuring poetry, a line of poetry, or lines of poetry. So if the metrical foot is the basic unit of measurement in a line of poetry, that's what we've decided, right? Then the metrical foot, which is either a stressed syllable followed by 1 or 2 unstressed syllables, that's our basic unit of measurement, right? The foot. That metrical foot itself can have different qualities to it. There is the iamb, the trochee, the anapest, the dactyl, and the spondy. Or if we're referring to them as adjectives, as we often do when we're describing a line of poetry, because remember, adjectives are descriptive words, right? We form those words by the following way: iambic, trochaic, anapestic, dactylic, and spondaic. Okay, so the most common, and really the only one I'm going to hold you responsible for knowing in this class, is the iamb, or the iambic, because it's the most common metrical foot in the English language. It is an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. Okay, kind of a da-da, 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 da-da rhythm to it. Unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. Today the sun, right? Whose woods these are, I think, I know. Unstressed followed by stressed. That rhythm, okay, that's an iambic. And that's the only one in this class I'm going to hold you responsible for. You can review these others if you like. The trochee is basically the opposite of the iambic. It's a stressed followed by the unstressed. The anapest is 2 unstressed followed by a stressed. Intervene in the dark. Da-da-da, da-da-da, da-da-da. That kind of rhythm, right? That's an anapest. And the opposite of that is the dactylic foot, which is stressed followed by 2 unstressed. The spondy is 2 one-syllable words, stressed. So true, blue, right? You have 2 words, equal emphasis on the stresses. That's a spondy, okay? Don't freak out. I know this is a lot of information, more than you'll ever need to know. Again, just be familiar with the iambic, because it is the most popular, most common form of metrical foot, again, in the English language and in poetry. So once we've identified what kind of metrical foot a poem seems to be characterized by, we want to measure a line of it. Okay, remember the basic unit measurement. Again, think of inches, miles, yards, right? These are units of measurement, we said. So the metrical foot is that basic unit of measurement. So a line of poetry oftentimes has more than one foot in it, right? Just like a yard has 3 feet in it, we know. So the terms that we use to describe the length of a line of verse are as follows. If the line only has 1 metrical foot in it, that's called a monometer, right? 1 line, or 1 foot, I should say. The diameter has 2 metrical feet in the line. The trimeter will have 3. And you can identify these prefixes, right? The tetrameter will have 4 stressed syllables in it. The pentameter has 5 feet or 5 stressed syllables in it. A hexameter has 6 feet. That's enough for now, okay? And really, when you've probably heard this phrase or this term and you never really knew what it meant. Have you ever heard of iambic pentameter? If you have and you're not sure what it means, now you know what it means. Iambic pentameter is simply a line of poetry that has 5 stressed syllables in it. And the iambic, remember that, is going to be the unstressed followed by the stressed syllable. William Shakespeare and so many of the poets in the English tradition often wrote in iambic pentameter. They made it famous, right? So if we look at a little excerpt from Shakespeare's sonnet, I think this is sonnet 23, but the 3rd and 4th lines particularly seem to represent this iambic pentameter. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. You should hear 5 stresses there. And summer's lease hath all too short a day. So you got unstressed followed by stressed syllables, and there are 5 stresses. That's iambic pentameter. Back to Frost, those opening lines from Stopping by Woods, that's a very, very consistent iambic tetrameter, because it has 4 stressed syllables. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though, right? But I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to... So you should hear that rhythm. Iambic tetrameter in the Frost poem. This one here, the Shakespeare, you have iambic pentameter. Listen, guys, don't worry. I'm not going to hold you responsible for all of the specifics of meter. I'm not going to ask you to look at a poem and identify rising meter or falling meter. I'm not going to ask you about masculine endings or feminine endings, right? I want you to know a few of the terms and a few of the concepts that are associated with rhythm and with meter, particularly those ones that I've listed for you in the learning unit. If you are an English major, or if you do some advanced work in English, upper division classes, graduate work in English, you will become more familiar probably with some of the nuances and some of the more intricate workings of prosody, of how poems use rhythm and meter in the way that we've been talking about. Okay, so I want you just to sit back and continue enjoying the poetry, especially enjoy the reading part of it. Enjoy reading it out loud. Hear the rhythm, hear those sounds, right? And let me know if you have any questions.